Hello everybody and welcome back to a lecture series. I'm Ted, your host, and for this lecture we are going to examine the reorganization of Roman Britain. And of course this is all taking place as the provinces, as imperial authority breaking down in the provinces of the Western Empire. In our last lecture we looked at the reorganization of Roman Italy, Roman Gaul, and Roman Hispania after the collapse of imperial authority. We saw the rise and the formation of the Visigothic kingdom in Spain, the Frankish kingdom in Gaul, and of course the Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy. We noted the similarities and the lengths at which the powers that came in there, the length at which they went to retain their links with Rome. And we also looked at the ways in which they broke with Rome, particularly in the ways in which the Franks broke and with the Franks broke with the Roman Empire, with Roman continuity. Now, the breaks that the Franks had with the Roman past would be relatively light compared to the break that would occur in Roman Britain. The fall of the Western Roman Empire was experienced really differently in Roman Britain. Discontinuity was the watchword in Roman Britain. Roman culture evaporated almost instantly. In fact, the Romans had left Britain before the collapse of the Western Empire. They really abandoned the province. And Britain holds the distinction of being the only area in which the citizens actively sought the Romans to come back and intervene and to defend and protect them. The Romans simply abandoned the province and tried to save their continental possessions. Roman Britain was simply too far away to merit Roman efforts. Now, the break with the Roman path was so sharp in Britain that Christianity itself would die out in Britain, as would the Latin language. Following the Germanic tribe crossing the Rhine in 409, the Roman legions stationed in Britain, they rebelled and they proclaimed one of their own commanders, a general named Constantine, as emperor. Now, Constantine withdrew virtually all of the Roman army from Britain. And he withdrew them so that he could go on to defeat the Germanic tribes that had entered the empire, to make good on his claim. And he also withdrew them so that he could defeat the Germanic tribe, but also make good on his claim to the imperial throne. Now, the Roman legions left in Britain were unable to really do much when the Germans started to attack Roman Britain. The Germans began their attacks right as soon as the legions left. Many groups began to attack Roman Britain, and they began to attack nearly all at once. The Picts in Caledonia, which was the name during antiquity for the region that we would call Scotland. The Scotii, which was a Celtic tribe from Ireland, they joined in on the attack to Roman Britain, and they would go on to conquer Caledonia. Now, the Picts and the Scots, though the two tribal groups attacking Roman Britain, they will be joined by Germanic newcomers. The Saxons. The Saxons were coming from the northeastern part of the Rhineland, and the Jutes. The Jutes hail from the Jutland Peninsula, the portion of Denmark that is on the mainland of Europe. It's sort of jutes, pardon the play on words, but it jutes out into the North Sea, sort of right in between the space of the Norwegian peninsula and the Swedish peninsula. So it jutes into the space right in between there. But that's not why they call it Jutland. Now, these Germanic groups begin to raid Roman Britain and then to carve out territorial entities from the province. By 600, the Germanic groups had established a few large petty kingdoms in Britain. Wessex, the home of the West Saxons; Sussex, the home of the South Saxons; Essex, the home of the East Saxons, or the kingdom home, that it can really be interchangeable. The Jutes. Now the Jutes settled in Kent, while a band of Jutes known as the Angles, a people from a small peninsula on the Jutish Peninsula, established kingdoms in Northumbria, Mercia, and East Anglia. East Anglia, of course, being where the East Angles settled. Now, the Saxons and the Jutes, these peoples who invaded Britain, they were at the time true barbarians. They were true barbarians in every sense of the word. As far as the Romans would define it, they spoke a Germanic language. They worshipped the old Germanic gods, Woden or Odin, Thor and Tyr, also Frigg. They were also illiterate. Now, the Celt Romano population of Roman Britain, they resisted the Germanic invasion. Had vigorously they had resisted the Roman invasions under Caesar, under Julius Caesar, and under Caesar Claudius. They had a little bit more luck against the. They had a little bit of luck against the Germans, but they didn't really have much. There are many legends that swirl around this time, and it is not entirely credible or incredible that a local Celt Romano war leader named Arthur lived, or even won a major victory over the Germans at the Battle of Baden in 500. Now, the battle did occur. To be certain, the Battle of Baden did occur, and the battle is notable. But it was really insufficient to deter the future Germanic advances. Arthur remains a very shadowy figure. He had many legends and myths attached to his name, his career, and its accomplishments. Now, for certain, we know that the Celt Romanos won the Battle of Baden. We do not know where the site is located. We do not have solid evidence to suggest that Arthur or this Arthurian figure was at the Battle of Baden. The earliest documents we have regarding Arthur come from the 9th to 10th century, which are, long after his death, nearly 500 years after his death. It is impossible, it is possible, I should say, really, that the later written records reflect accurately the oral traditions associated with Arthur, but it is really inconclusive, and it's inconclusive due to our lack of 6th century sources. We don't know what was happening in the 500s because literacy died out after the Germanic invasions. We do know that not all of the Celt Romanos chose to resist the German invasion. There was a very, very heavy migration out of Celt Romanos out of Britain to northern Francia at this time, to join their continental kin in what became known as Brittany. The Scotti leave Ireland and they settle in Caledonia to the north of Roman Britain and what would later become Scotland at this time. The most important Scotti kingdom will become Dalmatia. Or Dalriada, as some people would like to say it. Now that kingdom will later merge with the remnant Pictish kingdom, and that will form the kingdom of Alba or the kingdom of Scotland. Now, the effect of the Germanic conquest and the Celt Romano exodus was a very abrupt break with the continuity of the Roman practices. The Celt Romanos of Roman Britain, they're the ones who know the tradition. They're the ones who are practicing Christianity. They're the ones who would serve as the administrators of any sort of Roman provincial governing apparatus. They're the ones who speak the Latin language. Their exodus allows for this very, very sharp break between the Roman past and the new Germanic future. The fact that Roman institutions do not survive really, it's unsurprising. There's no one there who knows the Roman institutions. The Romans do not conquer Britain until fairly late in the year in the first century AD. They conquer it in the 50s under Caesar Claudius. Britain, it's assumed that they did not have the deep roots in Britain by the time of the German conquest, and that may be true. But we cannot also yet factor out the exodus of most of the Celt Romanos. The fact that the people who know the culture, the fact that the people who know the administrative practices are gone, sort of shines a fairly unsurprising light on the fact that the traditions break down and that they do not survive. The Romans had transformed the economy of Britain, and the only region of Britain that that had introduced coins was in the southeast, and that was due to the close proximity of the continent of the southeast of Britain, what we would now consider southeast England, that close proximity to the continent. The Romans, they had done a really remarkable job in popularizing the use of coin money and building towns and cities, and spreading manufacturing. Manufacturing was very localized in pre-Roman Britain. After the Roman conquest, coins, town building, wider interlinked economies with major manufacturing centers, true cities, and they would all become hallmarks of Roman Britain, particularly sites that produce very specialized pottery. By 450, the economic system in Britain had broken down. The Roman economic system had broken down. It had reverted to a very localized, small-scale economy with small-scale manufacturing. Coins are abandoned at the medium of exchange. The surviving coins from this period that we find, they have little notches in them. And that's because people were using these coins as jewelry. You couldn't buy anything. You couldn't use the money for anything. So they simply become articles of jewelry. Town life dwindles in Britain and it dies out. Public buildings fall into disrepair. And the speed of this break is very fast. It takes place in about 50 years. In about 50 years from the start of the Germanic conquest, this break happened? Did this social breakdown? Did this social and civic disruption occurs? And this would have very important long-term consequences in Western Europe. Britannia, the official name of the Roman province, falls out of use. A new name is adopted: Anglo-land, the land of the Angles. Is used. Most of the kingdoms were founded by the Angles, and so that name becomes the name of the kingdom. Anglo-land becomes England, and that's the name that we know this region has now. There's also a very dramatic linguistic shift as Latin dies out and is replaced by various Germanic dialects. These Germanic dialects, the dialects of the Jutes, and of the various Jutish bands, including the Angles and the dialect of the Saxons, they coalesce into Old English. The land that the Romans had never conquered, places like Ireland and Scotland, they become hotbeds of Celtic languages, and the Celtic language there still dominates. Now there are exceptions in Roman Britain to the breakdown in continuity. Wales and Cornwall, Welsh and Cornish, they're both descended from Celtic due to the fact that the Germans never conquered that area, and that the Romans, though they made incursions, they were never able to fully displace the old Celtic language. But because the Germans never conquered these areas, Welsh and Celtic, Welsh and Cornish, they remain Celtic languages. The other area of where the break is really severe is religion. In the provinces of Hispania, Gaul, and Italia, the German newcomers adopt Christianity. In Britannia, Christianity declines and dies out, and German polytheism proliferates. Christianity serves really only serves a continuing a continuing position or a continuing role in the Celtic borderland regions. So looking at Scotland and Ireland, that's where Christianity continues, and the loss or the decline of Christianity is a real tragedy for historians, because it makes it very difficult to track and to gauge development in Anglo-Saxon England. The disappearance of Christianity leads to the disappearance of literacy and writing. And without writing, there are no records, there are no written records. And what we do know about polytheistic Anglo-Saxon England is derived from archaeology or accounts written down after Christianity is reintroduced. There are also accounts from Celtic authors living in Scotland and Ireland, but they are really far removed from the events as they unfolded. Now, we do know that Christianity had indeed died out in Anglo-Saxon England. We know this because of the fact that it had to be reintroduced by outside missionaries. And in 595, missionaries arrived in Anglo-Saxon England from the continent. And they were dispatched by Pope Gregory the Great. The missionaries, their mission was spearheaded by a man named Augustine of Canterbury. I'm sorry about that. The new Christian missionaries, their mission was spearheaded or led by Augustine of Canterbury, who is often confused with the great Christian theologian Augustine of Hippo. Now, Augustine arrived in the Kingdom of Kent, where the Anglo-Saxon king Ethelbert had a Christian wife. Now, Augustine had great success in Kent. He was able to convert a number of prominent members of the king's court, along with the king himself, to Christianity. Now, the Christian missionaries, they generally encountered very little resistance from the Anglo-Saxons themselves. The main problem the missionaries had was that the Anglo-Saxons regularly relapsed back into Germanic paganism or polytheism at the first sign of trouble. The most successful missionaries operating in Anglo-Saxon England were actually Irish missionaries. Ireland was in Ireland, Christianity had been firmly entrenched, thanks largely to the career of Patrick, better known as Saint Patrick, the Christian missionary who converted the Irish to Christianity. Now, the Irish are actually responsible for converting many of the Anglo-Saxon communities back to Christianity. And the most well-known of these Irish missionaries was Saint Columba, who personally converted most of the Picts to Christianity. In 563, Columba founded a monastery on the island of Iona. Iona was served as the base of operations for Irish missionaries in their mission to convert the Anglo-Saxons. By the 1660s, Christianity was emerging supreme in Anglo-Saxon England. The return of Christianity was much more than a change in religion in Anglo-Saxon England. Christianity reintroduced literacy to England. This increases our knowledge of Anglo-Saxon history. King Ethelbert composes an Anglo-Saxon law code because he now has literate scholars at his court. We also know that towns are reestablished in Anglo-Saxon England, albeit to a lesser degree due to the return of Christianity. Now, when the Pope sent bishops to Anglo-Saxon England, they were required to reside in towns. Bishops were required by canon law or church law to live in towns. They could not live in the countryside. Bishops and ecclesiastic retinues of priests and deacons, all of the the persons needed to operate the churches, and to operate and to lead church operations in a given diocese. They had to take up their residence in the old abandoned ruins of Roman towns like Canterbury. These churchmen attracted enough followers to provide the services and goods needed to sustain city life. This return to habitation in cities and towns also leads to the stimulation of economic activity, which is followed by the reintroduction or the reintroduction of minted coins. This is a sign that Anglo-Saxon England is catching up to her contemporaries on the continent. This is a sign that Anglo-Saxon England is bridging the gap after that very sharp, very destructive break with the Roman continuity, with the Frankish kingdom in Gaul, with the Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy, and with the Visigothic kingdom in Spain. The reintroduction of Christianity in England had a wider impact on Western Europe. The Irish and the English monks of the 7th and the 8th century, they were the leading intellectuals of Western Eurasia, of Europe. The Irish and the English monks, they would go on to change the nature of monasticism or monastic life on continental Europe. Monasteries in Francia were not hotbeds of intellectual or academic activity. The same can be said in Italy, in Ostrogothic Italy or Visigothic Spain. They were mainly retirement homes for elderly churchmen or orphanages for local youth. In the British Isles, the monks were known for their academic pursuits. There was a very, let's say, plain reason or commonplace reason why the monasteries in the British Isles, on the British Isles, were hotbeds of academic pursuits. There was a reason why they had to study harder than their continental contemporaries. And that's because, unlike their continental churchmen contemporaries, the monks on the British Isle, they did not speak a Romance language. They didn't have a firm grasp of Latin, and they did not speak a Romance language. They had to study harder to master Latin. The Anglo-Saxons and the Celtic monks, they spoke languages that are not related to Latin. Latin was an alien and largely unintelligible language to the churchmen. They had to study long and hard to learn Latin, and as a result, their monasteries became the leading intellectual centers. They produced such notable figures as the Venerable Bede, or and of course his monastic home was at Garrow. Now the Irish monks came from an entirely rural environment. There were no towns in Ireland. Ireland is one of those places where civilization thrives, but town life doesn't thrive. There would be no town in Ireland really until the arrival of the Norse. The Norsemen actually found Dublin. When the Irish monks, when they arrived in the continent, they were startled and surprised by the fact that the monasteries were located in towns. The Irish monks attempted to reform monasticism on the continent and shape it into what they knew and what they had seen back in Ireland. Columbanus, he's a monk, and he's an Irish monk, and he spearheaded the drive to reform continental monasticism. Columbanus was known to tour monasteries and to berate the monks there, and then go to the king's court and berate the king on the state of the monasteries. And more often than not, the kings that he met with, they would agree with Columbanus, and they would grant him permission to reform their monasteries, or even better, they would endow new monasteries in the countryside, and that's what Columbanus really preferred. He preferred to have these monasteries in the countryside, away from away from the distractions of city life. The These new monasteries, they would reinvigorate continental monasticism, and lead to an intellectual resurgence among Christian officials, among these monks. The Germanic conquest of Britain resulted in a dramatic shift that reconfigured the language, religion, and the name of that region. The loss of writing obscures our ability to track developments and to verify certain figures, but miraculously, the Anglo-Saxon kingdom were able to rebound fairly quickly, reestablishing ties with the past and going on to influence their contemporaries on the continent. Now that we've sort of bridged the gap between the nascent Germanic kingdoms and the nascent Germanic kingdoms and the world that they were coming into, I would like to switch focuses once again. We're going to leave the nascent Germanic kingdoms in Western Eurasia, and we're going to head into the border zones of the Eastern Roman Empire and of the Sasanian Empire. Where we're going to look at developments there, and we're roughly still at the same time. We're roughly in the same time period. We're in the mid 7th century, moving forward. About to enter into the 8th century. So altogether, we're at the same time in these regions. And I say that because I just had a conversation with a fellow educator regarding thematic versus chronological presentation of material and planning and lesson planning. And I vacillate between the two, as you all can see. It's a bit more straightforward with U.S. history going forward chronologically, but it's you sort of get into a thematic impasse when you go through world, because there's so many regions, so many groups, and so much information to cover. So jumping into our lecture on the borderlands between the Roman and the Sasanians. And let me just begin by saying that despite the conflict between those two great empires, the Mediterranean world remained pretty much the same by the year 600, moving forward through the collapse of the power of the Western Empire all the way down to the year 600. Not much had changed. The former areas of the Western Empire became home to those Germanic kingdoms. Visigothic Spain, Vandalic North Africa, Frankish Gaul or Francia, Ostrogothic Italy, Anglo-Saxon Britain. They were out, but the territories of the Eastern Empire remained the same. In the East, there was the vast Sasanian Empire, the great heirs to the Achaemenids and the Persians. And lying between the Western Germanic kingdoms and the Sasanian was the Eastern Roman Empire, or simply the Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire, and it's known as Byzantine. And Byzantine is a name that was later applied to this state by historians. Byzantine refers to the old Greek colony of Byzantium, which Constantine I renamed as Constantinople. Now, the fringes of the Byzantine Roman or Eastern Roman Empire and the Sasanian Empire or the Persian Empire, the fringes of this area was inhabited by a number of minor groups. One of these groups was comprised of a set of semi-nomadic tribes living in the Arabian Peninsula. These people are sometimes referred to as Bedouins or Arabs, and they lived a very tough life. They lived in a very hostile climate. They were proud. They were polytheistic. They were clan or tribal oriented. They had no great unifying political organizations. Their main social organization was a clan tribe-based organization, and they resembled the German tribe that we previously discussed, in which they could come together to express a wider awareness of one solid ethnic group, but they were fiercely they were fiercely defensive when it came to their own tribal or clan autonomy. But within 100 years of their conversion to the last of the great war religions, these obscure desert nomads would go on to topple most of the great kingdoms that we're discussing right now. Conquering half of the Mediterranean world, they would permanently shatter the unity of the world. That would be the common social, religious, and linguistic paths that established a cultural hegemony. They would break all of that, and they would establish a cultural boundary that survives to this day. This conquest of theirs, which is one of the greatest in terms of permanence, begins with a middle-aged merchant. This merchant was from the city of Mecca, and he lived in the Arabian Peninsula during the beginning of the 7th century. This man faced a serious question regarding some very personal and religious topics. He faced these serious questions regarding himself, and he began roaming the deserts, often going to a cave to meditate. And in 610, he received a vision from God in this cave. In his vision, the angel Gabriel appeared to him and began teaching or informing him of a revelation from God. The angel Gabriel then commanded that the merchant recite back the revelation, the revelation to him. And over the next 20 years, more than 100 new revelations will follow. Collected together, these lessons became known as the Quran, which literally means the recitations. This merchant was named Muhammad, and the revelation that he received and the lessons that he received became the Quran and the foundation of a new religion, Islam. And Islam itself simply means submission. The religion advocated by Muhammad advocated a very stark form of monotheism, in which the primacy of God as the one and only deity was strictly stressed. Nothing was allowed to come between God and the worshiper. Acknowledging God's omnipotence and your own submission to God were key focal points of this religion. The concept is represented by the word Islam itself, which I said earlier literally translates or can be literally translated to mean submission. Now, Muhammad identified God, his God, had the same figure worshipped by the Jews and the Christians, and he established he brought in established Judeo-Christian figures like Abraham, Moses, Solomon, and Jesus. He sort of brings them in to be venerated human beings, who can be viewed as prophets, men who had received earlier revelation from God. But Muhammad was, in his teachings, the last in a long line of such prophets. The prophet who had been selected to receive the complete and accurate revelation from God, the final revelations to any sort of prophet figure from God. The figure of the prophet or the Rasul was very important in early Islam, and he was viewed as a divine messenger sent to warn and educate his people. And before we go any further, we'll break here. We'll come back and we will continue looking into the introduction of Islam and the call of Islam. As always, hit like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know what you thought about this lecture. I am Ted, and I will see you guys next time as we continue our lecture discourse.